don't know if you've ever seen them on your algorithm, but have you seen the like sisters ones that have like a podcast?
No.
It's honestly, I follow them because it's just interesting. And they're like, sister, what are your hobbies? And they're like, oh my God, sister, I love to cook. And they're just like, open mic. There's the one that hosts it. She's there all the time. And then it's usually like a different sister that comes on. I have learned that sisters and nuns are not the same.
Are they real nuns?
Yeah. They're real nuns. And it's like, they have very like philosophical conversations, very theological, obviously, conversations, because they're like, I'm probably going to get this wrong, but like nuns of Saint Dominica or something like that. I'm for sure getting that wrong because I'm not Catholic, but I found myself watching them because I'm like, honestly, it's just like really nice to see two ladies just like having a genuine conversation.
Yeah.
And they really have like joy for one another.
I love that.
And like the one I saw this morning, the one nun has like a master's in like Russian literature and like spent time in the Soviet Union before the collapse. And they're like, what was that like, sister? And she's like telling the stories. And I'm like, this is so interesting.
I need to check that out. That
and I
actually
just
sounds really good.
Right. And I'm just like, not the usual audience I would think for that kind of content, but I'm very much actually enjoying it. I think it's good to have like different perspectives. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not religious, but I'd still like to listen to religious
Of course.
folks.
Yeah, why not?
Absolutely. Because I think otherwise you get closed-minded. But anyway, now we've had that theological conversation.
Talk about nuns before Richard Ramirez.
Oh, yeah. I think we need some kind of like godly fortune with us.
You're not wrong. And again, we say this as non-religious people,
yes.
but I could not agree more.
No, absolutely not. Hello, everyone. I'm Charlotte.
And I'm Dina. Welcome to the Grim Curriculum.
We have finally made it to the conclusion of our Richard Ramirez series.
And we do want to thank all of you for joining us on this horrific adventure. This is officially the longest series we've ever done.
Yeah.
And honestly, we're very thankful for all the support that has gotten
100%.
on Spotify and iTunes. This whole series is working its way up our charts, like almost towards the total top.
I love that.
People are loving it.
Very
and I love that for
nice.
everyone.
I found that a word we've used a few times throughout the series is harrowing, and it certainly has been. But today, finally, we will be talking about the capture, the trial, and the death of Richard Ramirez.
We last left off with Jesse Perez, Richard's fence, speaking to investigators and confirming that the man in the sketches was, in fact, named Richard Ramirez. The police had now shared his mugshot with the public, despite the fact that they were extremely reluctant to do so.
The last thing they wanted was for the Night Stalker to know that they were definitely onto him.
On the morning of August 30th, 1985, Richard bought a Greyhound ticket to Tucson, Arizona to visit his brother Robert, who had moved there. At the time, he had no clue that his mugshot was being shared to the public, let alone that the police knew exactly who he was.
It was kind of lucky timing that Richard was out of town while they were like spreading this info.
Oh, absolutely.
Because had he been in town, he would have obviously cottoned on to the fact that they were cottoned on to him, and he would have like pieced out to a different state probably.
Well, his whole thing was that he understood that if he was caught, he would be killed.
Yeah,
that was where his head was
death.
at.
Yeah,
exactly.
For sure. When Richard arrived, he called Robert but got no answer. After multiple attempts, his wife Samantha picked up the phone. The relationship between her and Richard was strained. Like his other sister-in-law, she had accused him of coming on to her and was extremely uncomfortable around him.
After an hour, he called Robert again with no luck. Richard decided to wait at the bus terminal before trying again. And as he was killing time, he noticed plainclothes officers hanging around the station.
This is discussed in the Netflix documentary. Apparently, Richard could tell that they were undercover right away. The men were dressed in shabby clothes in an attempt to look like the other people who hung around the station, but upon closer look, it was easy to tell that they were freshly showered and clean-shaven, which gave them away.
The detectives appeared to be watching buses that had arrived from LA, but not the ones that were heading to it. So Richard decided to hop on one of those in hopes of not being detected.
As he was heading back, he eventually fell asleep despite a deep feeling of nervousness. By 7:35 a.m. that morning, the bus had arrived at its destination. He noticed that once again, officers were not paying attention to the buses arriving to LA.
But this is when it all went downhill for him.
And we love that. Richard immediately bought some marijuana and went to a local convenience store. He purchased some coffee and a pastry. As he waited for his change, he noticed a few elderly women pointing at him, and they seemed to be afraid.
They quietly uttered the words El Matador, or the killer, to one another.
As he heard this, he felt a sense of confusion. Why would these random women think that he was a killer?
And that's how delusional he is, too. I think that really speaks for itself, because he knows he's a killer, obviously. But he's like, why would they think I'm a killer?
Yeah, like, I've been out of town and, like, no one's anywhere near me. So, like, why would they think that?
Yeah.
You idiot.
Just as he was finishing that thought, he spotted a nearby newspaper. He grabbed it and ran out of the store.
Little did he know, the shop owner had already called the police.
As he ran, he heard the sirens approaching. Richard ran through numerous backyards, vaulting over the fences as he made his way towards the Santa Ana freeway.
He saw a bus and hopped on. Right away, the other people on the bus recognized him. After all, they had seen his mugshot in every newspaper in the area. He ran off as they pointed at him and whispered to each other.
His initial thought was to steal a car and make his way to Mexico. He spotted a lone woman sitting in her vehicle as she sat and waited for her boyfriend, who had quickly stepped into a nearby store to buy them some food. She quickly saw him approaching.
Her initial thought was that this guy looked upset, but as he got closer, she realized that he was looking right at her. He approached her and began yelling that his mother had died and he needed her car.
She told him no, and he told her that he had a gun. She began calling for help, and soon enough, a man named Carmelo Robles ran to her aid. He was then joined by Arthur Benavides, a local barber who had just finished reading about Richard in the paper.
This always pans out in my brain like an absolute movie scene. Like, it is all coming to this like culmination, and I can just imagine him like running from place to place, like hopping on buses, like talking to people, and he's like stunned, I think, because suddenly all this paranoia is really actually pointed at him.
Yeah.
And he's like, whoa, this shouldn't be happening. I'm better than this.
This is probably a ridiculous comparison, but it reminds me of in my day-to-day, I deal with a lot of feral cats.
Yes.
And these feral cats are trapped and brought so that they can be looked after, spayed, neutered, and found, a home. And every now and again, when you open that trap up, the cat bolts.
Yeah.
And then you're chasing it around this room. And I've literally seen cats fly.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, I have seen a cat fly further and higher than you would ever imagine. And he reminds me of a feral cat who has been caught.
Absolute chaos. And like, as the trap is getting smaller and smaller, he is just like bouncing around, basically.
Yeah, the brain has now shut off.
Yes.
He's gone totally primal.
Utter panic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love to see it. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
The two men saw Richard and yelled at him to get away from her. Richard noticed the shock in their eyes as they realized who he was, and he began running.
And I picture this because it's like, I really replayed this in my mind so many times. They're yelling at him because he's just some random guy. Who's
yeah, they're like, get away from her, like, asshole.
And they're like, go away. And then they just stop. And I can imagine that it's like they saw a ghost.
Literally.
The men were joined by a third person, Frank Moreno. As they chased him, Richard ran as fast as he could. He made his way to the front yard of a woman who began screaming as soon as she saw him.
I think this also goes to show how good the sketch was in the end, that people have seen it on the news, they're seeing it in the newspapers, on the magazines, they're talking about it with one another, because he has held them hostage for how long now? Like months and months and months.
And again, it's his mugshot that's in the paper. And that's a scary ass mugshot too. And when you it's like you see that mugshot and you're like, man, I don't want to ever run into this guy.
And then they're now seeing like Dracula in real life, basically, and they're like, whoa.
Exactly.
All while doing this, the sirens are getting louder and louder. Richard continued to run. He eventually made his way to Hubbard Street. He could not have picked a worse place to go. The area was filled with hardworking and loyal people who cared deeply about one another.
Everyone there knew not only his name, but his face. Richard hopped another fence and ended up in the backyard of Luis Munoz, who was barbecuing. He demanded to know who Richard was, and when he didn't get the answer he wanted, began beating Richard with his cooking utensils.
So this is like the first guy that's like laid hands on him so far.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a guy barbecuing and he's like, get the fuck out of here
Yeah.
with a spatula or something. Oh my God. Richard then vaulted over another fence and landed in the yard of another man who had been working on his daughter's car. Richard saw the vehicle and tried to steal it, but the man who had paid for the car with his hard-earned money wasn't having any of it. He grabbed Richard by his scrawny neck and began choking him.
Richard got free and hopped another fence. When he got to the sidewalk, he stopped a woman named Angela, who upon seeing him began screaming, "El Matador! El Matador!" Richard demanded her car keys and she refused. He punched her in the stomach and continued to yell. Little did he know her neighbor was already sitting in her vehicle, and when he heard the screaming, he leapt out of the car to go help her.
Across the street, a neighbor named Jose Burgoyne was watering his lawn when he heard all the commotion. He dropped his hose and ran towards the woman with his two sons. By now, Richard had managed to get behind the wheel.
The moment they heard the words El Matador, they knew exactly who she was talking about. By now, Angela's husband, Manuel, had heard her yelling and was running to her aid. He grabbed a 2-foot-long metal bar and ran towards Richard.
When he saw the crowd of men coming after him, he leapt out of the car and began running. As they chased him and yelled El Matador, more people joined in. All in all, it was a group of almost a dozen people.
Manuel ran as he swung the metal bar in an attempt to hit Richard. Eventually, he caught up to him and began beating him in the head. He started yelling to Angela to get his gun as the other men stood over Richard, who was now cowering on the ground.
By now, both the LAPD and LASD officers were on their way. First to arrive was Sheriff Deputy Andres Ramirez. He had gotten reports of a man with a gun, but had no idea that the man in question was the Night Stalker.
As he approached the scene, the men told him, "We got him," and asked Richard his name. As he panted heavily on the ground, Richard simply said, "Ricardo Ramirez." The police on scene had to break up the mob who had the full intent of killing Richard Ramirez themselves.
I think I've only maybe said this once or twice before on the over the course of the podcast, but in that moment as a police officer, it would sure be tempting to be like, sorry guys, I didn't see anything.
It reminds me of the guy who arrested Richard Chase.
Yes.
Where he's like, I wanted to shoot him.
Yes, exactly.
But I cannot do that.
Yes.
And that says a lot about how good of a cop you are.
And to be the people also in question that were kind of kicking the crap out of Richard, you would, I think, in that moment want to listen to police, but also you're like, absolutely not. We got him here and now, and we are going to eviscerate this monster so he can't hurt anybody else. I don't even think it was like a glory thing at that point to be like, I'm the one that got him from the people. I think it was like, this monster has been torturing our community for how long, and we finally have him in our hands. We're not letting him go.
Oh, 100%.
But they had to. The police asked him how badly he was hurt, to which Richard did not respond. As more officers arrived, they asked Richard if he was Richard Ramirez, to which he replied,
"It's me, man."
They placed him under arrest after his head was bandaged from the wounds he had sustained during the chase. By now, a crowd of hundreds had formed. Richard was clearly afraid of the crowd. The police reassured him that he was under their care and that no one else would hurt him, which is very ironic, isn't it?
Of course.
The poetic irony of all of this, to him, first of all, be like, I have Satan on my side. I am invisible and invulnerable, to suddenly being like, no, you got to protect me from the people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
By the time they arrived at the police station, members of the press were already waiting for them. Richard kept his head down and didn't make eye contact with anybody.
As he was taken to a cell, he couldn't help but wonder how Satan could have ever let this happen to him.
An officer would later testify that Richard told him the following.
I want the electric chair. They should have shot me on the street. I did it, you know. You guys got me, the Night Stalker. Hey, let me have a gun to play Russian roulette. I'd rather die than spend the rest of my life in prison. Can you imagine? The people caught me, not the police.
He's right.
He is right about that for sure, but I'm glad that he had to spend time in prison. I'm glad they didn't shoot him out in the street like he thought that's how it would end, right? Like he
That's
thought
the
the
easy
police
way
would
out.
kill him. Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't get the easy way out,
Mm-mm.
motherfucker.
By the time Gil Carrillo got to the station, the crowd had grown even more and they were angry. Frank arrived 10 minutes later. When they questioned him, Frank introduced himself, and before he could say anything else, Richard spoke and said,
I know who you are.
Frank was taken aback by this. He had never had a suspect recognize him. Richard had known of Frank Salerno from his work on the Hillside Stranglers case, and by all accounts, he was starstruck.
Suddenly, Richard didn't want to talk anymore, so Frank and Gil began leaving the room. Richard stopped them from leaving and started focusing in on Gil.
And Gil talks about this in the documentary. He says, like, he started speaking in slang that made Richard kind of recognize that, like, Gil was from the streets as well. Like,
Yeah,
he'd
they were
grown
both
up hard.
Latino guys,
Exactly,
right? Like,
yeah.
yeah.
And so he kind of like got to his level and started
Yes.
speaking to him in a way that made Richard more comfortable. Gil would also later say that there was one point of the interview where he began to feel genuinely frightened. Richard was speaking to them about his family, and he had his head down on the table and he began breathing heavily.
Gil also said that Richard began hyperventilating to the point where he fully expected him to start levitating from his seat. Because Gil, he believed in God. He
Of
was a
course.
Christian man. And it was Gil actually in the Netflix documentary that mentions like this became about like good and evil.
Mhm.
You know, he's like, I believe in God and I pray to God. And Richard is clearly thinking he's some kind of Satanist. And so it becomes this like good versus evil. And then he's in here and he's now deep breathing and hyperventilating. And he's like, oh shit, maybe he is actually a demon.
He says, like, I have seen the most horrific murder scenes you can imagine. I've watched people die. But if this motherfucker starts levitating around the
Yes.
room, I am out of
Yes,
here.
because Gil was also a soldier in his
Yes,
youth as well,
yeah.
and he had seen action
Mhm.
overseas. So it's not only is he an experienced cop, an experienced detective, he's
Mhm.
also an experienced soldier.
Yeah.
That is not a flappable man.
No, not
but
at
for
all.
scrawny little Richard to be like hyperventilating and Gil to be like, oh, absolutely not. Like, holy cow.
Afterwards, Frank and Gil left the room and went outside. The mob had once again grown even more, and it was clear that they were out for blood. After all, this was the man who had haunted them and made every person who knew of his existence fear for their lives.
As Richard was led out to the police car, the mob had to be restrained from getting to him. Frank sat down in the back seat with Richard. The drive to jail was only a few miles away. As they drove down the street, they saw a woman who, upon seeing Richard, opened her blouse to flash him.
This was all as the crowd of people chased the police car, exclaiming with both anger and happiness that he was caught. And this is where it all begins.
It really does.
With the ladies.
Family members of the victims would later say that they were beyond thrilled that the community had worked together to catch the man who had brutally murdered their loved ones. The joy and relief had spread through the city, with the mayor of Los Angeles even saying that he was proud of his city for coming together to catch such a monster.
And with that, the trial started.
So this is really like the beginning of the end, I think,
Mhm.
you know?
But this is Richard in his glory right now, unfortunately.
Pretty much, yeah. And because now, as much as he's a captured creature, the attention is all on him. And I think that's what he's wanted this whole time.
Yeah, we didn't really touch on this, but Richard was fascinated with serial killers.
Yes, he absolutely was.
He had read about, obviously, the Hillside Stranglers, Ted Bundy.
He loved Jack the Ripper.
Yes, and so he wants to earn his way into the history books.
The Hall of Fame, if you will, or
Exactly.
infamy.
And that's what he's getting right now. He's
Exactly.
getting almost that recognition that he's always wanted.
Totally. When they arrived at the jail, Frank told Richard that he was putting him in a special cell. It had once belonged to Kenneth Bianchi, one of the Hillside Stranglers. Richard was thrilled about this.
The whole point of this was that, like we said, they knew Richard was fascinated by serial killers. They did all of this to make him feel important and be more willing to talk about his crimes.
After his arrest, Richard was put into a lineup as suspect number 2. They brought together numerous witnesses to identify him. Amongst them was 6-year-old Anastasia Hronas.
They had Richard repeat his usual lines of, "Shut up, bitch," as the witnesses watched. Gil asked them if they had any questions. Anastasia raised her hand and quietly asked,
"Do I put the word 2 or the number 2?
The prosecutors were open about the fact that their goal was to seek the death penalty. After all, to the majority of people, Richard Ramirez was clearly a monster in human form.
That is, to everyone but the women who were now lining up in droves in an effort to see the man that they knew as the Night Stalker.
Once again, if you'd like more of a deep dive on what kind of a person it takes to fall in love with a serial killer, please check out our episode on hybristophilia.
It's a really good one. It's just interesting overall, and it hits a lot of different cases. It was clear to everyone involved that there was a next level amount of drama within this courtroom. Those involved would later say that society had not seen this level of a legal circus since the days of Charlie Manson.
Richard began to play to the crowd immediately. He knew that they wanted to see a monster, so he gave them one.
Richard was represented by Daniel and Arturo Hernandez. The two men had never represented a case like this, let alone one where the death penalty was at stake. In fact, they had only both been practicing law for about 2 years.
So how did these two men end up representing one of the most hated people in American history?
Richard's parents had called them from El Paso. Richard's new lawyers had grown up in the area and knew them. His father spoke with them and asked for their help, and after a brief conversation, they, I think, foolishly agreed to represent him.
I don't understand the thought process. I think they were also after. I think everyone here is after fame in some way or another.
But that would be like me as a graphic designer, say, with 2 years under my belt, and the prime minister comes to me and is like, "We want you to do the new flag." I'd be like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I'm not the person. I don't have the experience. I don't want any part of this. Because if I fuck up,
oh yeah, you're done.
Dunzo.
And these guys were like, "We got this."
Spoiler alert.
Immediately, the media caught on to this, and many members of the public began to question whether or not these two men, with so little experience, were the right people for the job.
And even Frank Salerno agreed. He would later say that men who had represented those with crimes of petty theft had no place in a case where someone was being charged with the murders of that many people.
During the trial, the prosecutor even said,
"The gentleman standing in front of Mr. Ramirez has really no standing in the court."
To which Richard haughtily replied,
"Well, they do to me."
I don't know.
For those of you listening and not watching, the face I just pulled, I'm sure was absolutely ridiculous. The drama, the idiocy, the foolishness. It is a circus.
It is a circus.
It really is.
The main concern for the prosecutors at this time was the event of a mistrial. The idea of the jury not being swayed in either way was a huge risk to everyone involved.
I mean, it was hard enough to find folks for the Idaho 4 murders to find a jury that would not be biased against Brian Kohberger. Yeah. I can't imagine. The whole of the U.S. would want you dead in the ground. Never mind anybody in California or L.A.
Oh, absolutely.
How did they manage to find an impartial jury? That will shock me to the rest of my days.
Yeah.
At one point, Richard's lawyers accused the prosecutors of acting in a childish manner in an effort to play it up for the cameras. They even threatened to take him outside and teach him a lesson. You're lawyers! You can't threaten other lawyers in a court!
Yeah, he literally says, he's like, if he continues to act in a childish way, I might as well just take him outside and teach him a lesson. And you just hear the courtroom just go
oh no. while the prosecutors continued to play upon their lack of overall experience.
And to me, there's no doubt that everyone in the courtroom hearing his defense lawyers say something like that just makes them think that they're even less experienced.
Totally. You are proving their point in a bad way.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Richard continued to laugh and smile at the cameras.
In fact, one of his lawyers even said,
"You're in the big leagues. You gotta perform." No,
you don't.
You
You're
are
in
not.
a court of law, sir.
I don't want anybody helping Richard. I understand that it is your right to, representation, and I absolutely believe in that. But it's like, your lawyers are not helping you.
No.
They are flushing you down the drain. They don't care. They're getting the celebrity. They're getting the money. Like, they don't give a shit if you live or die.
Yeah. On October 24th, 1985, Richard stunned the courtroom by holding up the palm of his hand to show that he had drawn a pentagram on it. And this, in my opinion, is one of the most famous photos of Richard Ramirez. He's going like this. We've all seen it. And what I think about is I think we've been so desensitized to that photo, but I can only imagine the shock when people saw this.
The gasp would ripple through the courtroom.
It did, because they show this in the documentary. Yes. And you hear it. Some people are gasping in shock, and other people, you can just hear this visceral disgust.
Yes, absolutely. And it's given, again, mentioning him again, Charles Manson with his swastika on his forehead. It's just for the shock and awe.
100%.
You don't really believe in it. You're just being a dick.
Mm-hmm.
After all of this, Richard had the gall to plead not guilty to all charges.
As the court was recessed, he exclaimed, "Hail Satan," as those in the room once again gasped in shock and disgust.
At a later date, Richard appeared in court once again. It seems that his attempt at being noticed worked. Now, there were even more women in there to see him.
More and more of them were now sending him suggestive photos, some of whom had ropes tied around their necks.
These are not girls. These are not girls. Even those designated to put Richard to death couldn't deny that what he had was considered an animalistic magnetism.
Yeah.
No, stop giving these people too much credit.
Oh, God. This was all while Richard would continue to smile and wave at them in court. They're talking about how he murdered someone. He looks back and he's
he's
making googly eyes at the girls.
Not paying attention to the judge or the lawyers. He's just having a look around the audience.
My favorite thing in regards to this entire case is always going to be the woman in the documentary when they're talking about
I know
this,
exactly.
And she just says, "Well, I'm sorry, but those were some of the dumbest bitches ever." Because they were.
Yeah. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I'm not one to use the term crazy bitch when it comes to other women, because I believe 9 times out of 10 a man has caused you to be that way. But crazy bitches be here for sure.
Absolutely.
Oh my Lord. In addition to all of the murders, Richard was also subject to being charged for the numerous cases of child sexual abuse. Before the hearing, Phil Halpin, the prosecutor, along with Frank and Gil, went to visit Anastasia Hronas.
Their meeting was obviously an incredibly difficult one. In fact, after speaking with her, the men all left one by one in tears.
She's about 7 years old.
Yeah.
This little girl.
After that, they decided that the murders were enough. The last thing that they needed was to put her through the trial and make her live through all of the abuse again.
They decided not to pursue those charges. They talk about when they brought her in to identify him in the lineup, and they were really worried about doing this to her.
Of course.
And I think that obviously tied into why they decided not to pursue charges in the end. But they said she didn't seem scared. She was very sort of stoic in the moment. And like we mentioned, she heard them all say, what they had to say. And then Gil said she simply looked up at him and said, "Yeah, do I do the word 2 or the number 2?" And then that was it. And I just think how what a brave little individual. Holy moly.
The trial went on until January 31st, 1989. Richard was brought into the courtroom wearing a black suit and aviator sunglasses. The press stated that he was being accused of a total of 43 crimes, 13 of which were murders.
Numerous security guards were set up outside the courtroom as countless people waited in hopes to see him.
In total, prosecutors called over 140 witnesses. This included Maria Hernandez. Along with her were others who had survived his brutal attacks. One of the things that really stands out to me is the granddaughter of one of the victims.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's in the courtroom and she's hearing all this and she's like, I couldn't take it. I had to leave. So she
Yep.
goes and she like sits down on this bench outside the courtroom and there's this kind of young adult man sitting next to her
Mm-hmm.
and she's looking at him and she's like, I wonder if, he's also someone whose family
Yeah.
member was
Yeah.
killed by Richard, and she feels this like sympathy for him. And he kind of like moves his sleeve up and she sees that he's drawn a pentagram
Yeah.
on his wrist. And in that moment, she's like, I'm sitting next to someone who worships the man who took my grandmother's life.
Yeah. Exactly. Crazy.
Which I can't even imagine all the feelings you would feel.
I think the sheer force of the emotion behind that realization that you're very much like a foot away from someone who is very much on the opposite side of you, let's put it that way. The violence that you would feel, or like just the utter, I don't know, it would be hopelessness, I feel. Because like, how could someone support someone like Richard Ramirez?
I'm a little shocked that there were no physical fights between people.
Between his supporters and the lovely women chasing after him, and then obviously the rest of the community who had been completely victimized by him. Yeah, you're absolutely right. This continued until September 20th, when Richard Ramirez was found guilty of murder.
On November 7th, it was time for sentencing. The punishment of Richard's crimes would be death in the gas chamber.
But dear listeners, I think we all know by now, this never happened. Despite this, Richard would later ask both Frank and Gil whether or not they would attend his execution. Gil expressed uncertainty, while Frank said he would absolutely be there for it.
The entire trial cost $1.8 million, which would remain the most expensive trial in California history until O.J. Simpson came onto the scene in 1994.
Dang. While awaiting trial, Richard would go on to meet Sean Penn.
So Sean Penn was in jail for drunk driving. And the two met, and like Richard's like, oh, sweet, Sean Penn.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of Sean Penn after what he did to like Madonna and stuff. People seem to forget about things that like these guys do, and they're like, oh my God, he's got Oscars and he's such a good actor. It's like, he kidnapped and beat the shit out of Madonna for like 3 days.
Yeah.
What do you mean? Like,
not a good guy.
No. Richard wrote to him and asked him for an autograph. Sean replied by saying he had no sympathy for him and hoped he would die soon. Which, like, okay, Sean, I'll give him credit where credit's due.
And all of that brings us to Doreen Leoy, who we talked about in our hybristophilia episode. She had been writing to Richard since 1985, and the two were married in 1996, with Doreen saying she would die by suicide after he was executed.
But this never happened. In fact, when Richard died, he was engaged to another woman, a 23-year-old writer. Richard had applied for countless appeals, but they were all, of course, denied. He died of complications caused by cancer, along with hepatitis C caused by his substance abuse.
The body of Richard Ramirez was never claimed, not even by his family, and he was cremated.
And that, dear listeners, is finally the end of Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker.
There's a lot here that we didn't touch on that you guys can go watch. There is, of course, Richard Ramirez being on Maury, which is psychotic.
Completely bizarre.
You know, the typical audience member of Maury, right?
Of course.
And Richard's talking about all this stuff, and those people are pissed.
Yeah.
They are not having it.
No.
He was interviewed by so many people. I would like to think that his time in jail was miserable, but I really do think it was probably some of the best years of his life.
I was going to say, it was probably fairly comfortable, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, he was writing women left, right, and center.
They were writing him.
Yeah, there was one point where the women would actually send him these nude photos, which I don't even know how he got them, but he got these photos. And then they would get mad at him because he was selling the photos to other inmates. Yeah.
Like, guys, he is a serial killer.
Yeah. Not only that, he's a rapist.
Like, all the bad things. All the bad things.
He's not going to be a good guy. And there's, again, I talked about it, I think, last episode, the one that says, yeah, but he's a really nice guy. And the guy goes, he's killed 13 people. And she goes, I know, but he's really sweet. He ain't.
No.
That is a mask.
And seek therapy.
Seriously.
I don't know what that says about you as a human being, but it makes me think that maybe you need to, like, I don't know, go home and punch your parents in the face. Like,
something.
I don't know.
There's one woman who says these women didn't realize that to Richard, they were prey.
Yes.
And that if he was out and he knew of them, he wouldn't find them and go live a happy life with them. He would find you and brutally murder
100%.
you too.
He would find you an easier target. You're inviting him in.
Exactly.
He would just be like, yeah, Satan keeps sending them my way.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it.
Oh my God. And then next thing, there'd be decapitated heads on people's lawns. Yep. And oh my Lord. Anyway.
We did it.
All that to say, we are done. We have climbed Everest and come back down the other side. I don't know if that's how you climb Everest. I'm never going to do it, but you know.
We took a little toboggan down Everest is how I feel.
Yeah, white knuckling it all the way.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this series. I know it's been a really hard one. I know it's been a really long one too. We're going to do something a little bit lighter hearted. Mm-hmm. And then I think we're probably just getting right back into it.
Probably. We're going to plan some of our next episodes here pretty quick. Yep. And so stay tuned for those. Of course, we are in the outro of this particular episode where we like to do a little bit of housekeeping. So first things first, if you didn't know, we have a Patreon. So if you've been listening on Spotify or Apple Music or any of your other favorite podcast platforms, but you're like, hey, how could I support these two lovely ladies a little bit further? Yeah. I like their faces. I'd like to see more of them. The Patreon is where you can do that. Patreon.com/thegrimcurriculum.
We have released this entire series in video form.
Yes.
So when you're on Patreon, you get all of the episodes, including extra credit in video form. Mm-hmm. We have a Discord, which is a really great community.
It is.
We've got early episode reveals for free on Patreon. Our top tier, of course, the cream of the crop.
The Grim VIPs.
Yes.
So the wonderful, beautiful Mayhem Mudkip, Lisa, Nova, Kev Cords, Brian, Bob, Paranoid Pop Rocks, Steven Centauri, Judy, and Atlantean Jedi.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to the moon and back. Quick reminder before we also wrap up, follow us on Twitch. We're trying to plan our next stream. I don't know if it's going to be some more Stardew Valley or something else. We bought that Bigfoot game some time ago.
I want to play the Bigfoot
So
game.
If that sounds like something that might interest you, let us know. Do you want to see the Bigfoot game? It could be an absolute shit show. Who can say?
It could be, but from my understanding, we can either both hunt Bigfoot or one of us can be Bigfoot and hunt the other.
I think we could take turns in doing that.
Exactly. So it sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for listening. This has been The Grim Curriculum.
Did you know, since the 4th of July is not too far around the corner, during the Revolutionary War, if a British officer died in battle, he'd be sent home in a barrel of red wine. And not too long ago, a lady bought a house, and in the cellar was 12 barrels of wine. She went to cut them open to use for a DIY project and discovered a 200-year-old fermented soldier.
What?
Yeah, fun fact.
Bye.
Bye.
That's crazy.
Yeah.